In this second video in my series on how to make games, I'm going to talk about playtesting. This is the process of actually trying the game out and improving it. Remember that my goal in this series is to help someone get game ideas, develop them, and in the end make a playable game that other people can enjoy. Playtesting is probably my favorite part of the process. If I said anything really positive in part 1 about getting ideas, I do enjoy that, but playtesting I think is so much better because you actually get to see how the game works with other people. Most of what I learned about playtesting I learned at Protospiel. This is a game designer convention that I attended for many years. I made a lot of good friends at Protospiel, and I learned a ton about playtesting games. There I saw games that pretty much died on the table the first time the designer tried them. We knew it wasn't going to work. That game wasn't going to be played again. And then there were other games that went on to be published and enjoyed by people all over the world. I'm going to take some of the most important lessons I learned at Protospiel and share those with you in the next few slides. Remember from last time there were two things I pointed out. First of all, ideas are everywhere. You're going to want to remember that because as you are trying to solve problems in your game, you're going to need ideas. So just remember that there are always ideas. They will come in time. And also, remember that if the game isn't working and you got to give up on it, don't be discouraged. You will likely have another idea soon and you can start working on that one. The other thing was I encourage you to start a game design notebook if you want to make games, because in there you can save everything that you think of that might make a good game. And as much as I enjoy that, I really want to stress in this video that we don't want to keep the ideas in the notebook. We want to see if they work. So playtesting is a process where you're going to take your game from the idea stage to reality, and that's what I like about it is we're actually going to see how it works, because it might work on paper and ideas, but in reality it's a flop. It's not fun, and we need to know that. So playtesting is where we're going to do that, and also realize that it is work. It very likely will be work in the early part of playtesting, and your playtesters need to know this. If they usually play strategy games and you're working on a party game, for example, it's going to be work. They can't think of it as pure play. But the goal is to work on it enough that the people in your target audience will in fact see it as play. They won't even think most of the time that that much work went into it. My one bit of advice that I tell aspiring game designers is make a playable prototype as soon as possible. If you've got enough rules in your game design notebook that you could start playing the game, make a prototype. And don't waste a lot of time making it look pretty. You notice on the left here, this was one of the last prototypes that I got out at a game design gathering, and there were quite a few laughs at the table when I brought this out because they had fancy prototypes, and as you can see my cards were different sizes. I had handwritten cards, and we played this, and sometimes they couldn't even read my writing on the cards, but we realized by the end of that that it had a core of an idea that was fun, and that was my goal. I was glad that I was able to play it enough to see that it was in fact fun, and I worked on it, and I've since polished it a couple of times. On the right I have a prototype that I did with my computer game that I was working on, and you see I follow the same principle. While some of these graphics look pretty good, I have no background in the slide, and these operations down at the bottom were just quickly created in an art program, black and white with straight lines. So even in computer game design, I try to just get something that's playable right away. I don't want to waste a lot of time on an idea that might not be fun when it gets to the table. Another bit of advice is collect game components. I used to buy a lot of games, some that I wouldn't play, get them at thrift shops or garage sales just so that I could get the components that I could use in other games. So the goal is to get it in front of your core testing group, get it in front of the people who understand that this could be work rather than play. Remember the answers to these questions. These were from the first video that I did. And when you start working on a game, I suggested that you list your design goals and you talk about who it is for, who's the target audience. You want to make sure that your core testing group knows the answer to these questions, because when they're playing, it shouldn't necessarily be for them. They have to answer the questions in light of these goals and in light of that target audience. when you actually start playtesting, remember that this is sort of a circular process. You're going to play the game and you're looking for problems, because it's almost certain that coming out of your notebook in just the form of ideas, it's almost certain there are going to be problems. So you're going to try to find those problems, and the goal is that you will tweak them. Some people might be lucky enough to be able to tweak them in the middle of the playtest session and keep playing, but many times you got to stop and tweak the rules later. It depends how bad they are. And then you're going to play it again, and that continues, because you will uncover more and more problems as you go, most likely. One bit of advice here is to think of this word tweak. It implies a minor change. Don't go too crazy with drastic changes. I know at first your game might be so rough that it needs a lot of changes, but be careful with big changes, because what you likely will be doing is introducing other problems that you haven't anticipated. So it's good to tweak it, just a couple changes, maybe just one change at a time, and see what effect it has on it. As you are improving the game and the rules, I'm going to suggest that you improve the prototype as you go, and I have some examples here. In the upper right, this is the computer version of the game that I showed a few slides ago that was done on paper. It actually ended up looking that way even in the final version. Here on the left I have a Western game that I worked on, and you notice it's just black ink, no color in the graphics. That was good enough for the testing that I was doing, keeping in mind that the target audience would probably be gamers. On the right I have a prototype that I thought would be for school, so it needed to look a little better, it needed to look fun, and I put a lot more work into those graphics and into that color. And at the bottom I have a couple party games I was working on. Mass market games like that, they're going to really need to look polished if you're going to put them in front of your target audience in late stages of playtesting. So I printed those at Office Depot on glossy cardstock in full color. Here's the best question that I came across in all those years of playtesting at Protospiel, and I think you should either ask this to your playtesters, or at least as you watch them play, make sure that you could answer it based on your observation. So here's how I worded it. What keeps them playing from turn to turn and from game to game? And to go into that a little bit more, on the turn to turn, have them think about what are they looking forward to after their turn ends and as they wait for their next turn. Because that tells you a lot about the fun elements of your game. They might be looking forward to the game ending, actually, if they're honest, and if that's the case, it's something that you need to know. When people play games, they probably do not consciously answer that question, but it's a very important question that keeps them into your game. And if you know the answer to it, you can capitalize on your game's strengths and you can minimize their weaknesses, so that those things come through in a way that the players experience that. And then to go a little bit further, think about from game to game. In other words, when that game ends, why would they want to play it again later? Maybe a week later or maybe immediately. What makes them want to play it again? Do they want to see if a different strategy will pan out, or did they just have so much fun because of the unique elements that they just want to play it again? I get asked this question a lot, and to be honest, this was a hard question for me to answer when I was making a lot of games. When is the game done? First of all, don't consider it done until you've done some blind play testing. And by that I mean you're going to hand somebody the game with rules, all the components, and they're going to figure out how to play it without you giving any input. That's blind play testing. If you're lucky, you'll get to be there and observe it. Maybe you could set up something where you get a video of it later. But ideally, you want to be able to analyze that blind play testing session as much as possible, because you will learn from there whether or not your game stands on its own. It really needs to if it's going to be in any published form beyond what you can teach. Tom Jolly is a game designer I interviewed a few years back. I asked him how he knows when it's done, and he said when he wants to immediately play it again, he knows it's done. And I thought that was interesting, because that implies that he's part of his own playtest group in the late stages of the game. That works for some designers. I asked James Ernest in an interview one time when he knows the game is done, and he said when it's worth what he will sell it for. James Ernest sold some games for under $5, and some of the games he made were published into expensive board games that would be probably $40, $50. and within that range he would play test them accordingly. So maybe a cheaper game he wouldn't care that much if he still saw problems in it. My main point with all that is just to say that the game designer is going to make the call when the game is done. My final advice is just to enjoy the process and learn from it as much as possible. Some people will make games that reach many people. Some people will make games that make them a lot of money. But in the end, most games are not going to go very far. They're not going to make a ton of money. What you're going to get from the experience will be lessons that you learned, skills that transfer to other areas in life, and of course, the relationships you build as you play test and work with other people. So that wraps up my presentation on playtesting. The next video will be about publishing the game, how to make it into something that will reach many other people.